Welcome to Cosmic Scene with Jill Jardine. In today's episode, I'm going to discuss the major astrological transits that everybody experiences in their lifetime. We'll talk about when they occur and what you can expect during these astrological transits. So stay tuned. Welcome to today's episode on major astrological life transits that everybody goes through in their lifetime. This is a follow-up episode from the previous episode where I discussed Kundalini, baby, and briefly I touched upon these life transits. Well, today I will discuss them more in depth and what one may experience at this time. I'll also be sharing information on the generational groups and birth dates of the groups that are currently experiencing these major life transits. At the end of the episode, I will teach Sanskrit mantras that will help with mitigating planetary transits that everyone can use. These mantras can be used by everyone, not just those who are going through the major life transits. So before I discuss these major transits, I just want to give some basic astrology 101 information. Some of you may not realize that all the planets in astrology are named after ancient Roman deities, such as Saturn and Mercury, but these deities also have Greek counterparts, ancient Greek counterparts. For example, the planet Mercury is the messenger of the god, the Roman name Mercury. Mercury was a psychopomp helping the dead pass to the other realms and bringing messages between dimensions. He had the winged feet and hat, and his Greek counterpart is Hermes. That's an example of the astrological archetypes and their origin from Roman and Greek mythology. Now, the first transit I want to discuss that everybody goes through is called the first Saturn Return, and that occurs between 28 and 30 years old. Now, the planet Saturn was named after the Roman deity whose Greek counterpart was Kronos. So Saturn and Kronos are the lord of time. They rule structure and form and time and order. Saturn is the planet that is the lord of time and determines how much time we have in this incarnation. The soul has to come into form to incarnate in this lifetime, and this is Saturn's domain. Basically, our soul is coming into physical form. So at the Saturn return, people wake up to the limitations of life and embodiment in a body. They also have major psychological and emotional transformation, and ideally at this time of the Saturn return between 28 and 30, they become spiritual adults. They are being pressured internally to actualize themselves constructively in life between 28 and 30. Now, if you're beyond that time, think back when you were 28 and 30 and what was going on in your life then. And however you may have had resistance, that isn't such an easy time for many people. There may be resistance to making necessary changes in life to develop to the next stage. So if there is resistance, there can be suffering, and there can be loss, such as loss of a job or a relationship at the first Saturn return. Just think of it this way. At the first Saturn return, the person is being polished like a gem to remove the dirt surrounding the diamond of the soul. So in other words, there can be some issues around ego and soul trying to come through like a lotus through the mud to shed the ego and connect with the real purpose of this lifetime. So at the Saturn return, some of the symptoms are one may change jobs or career paths. They may go back to school or take advanced educational degrees. At the Saturn return between 28 and 30, one may move geographically far away to the other coast even. Relationships may end, or we see the opposite happening at the Saturn return. One may become more committed to a relationship and become married. Saturn rules responsibility. So one may find themselves having to be more responsible, maybe starting a family of their own, or others find themselves being more accountable to their boss or career. Saturn rules physical form, so many may experience health issues at this time between 28 and 30. And by health, I mean physical, emotional, psychological. So there can be some form of life crisis at this time. Saturn also rules teachers, so some may connect with a spiritual teacher or guru at their first Saturn return between 28 and 30. So who's going through their first Saturn returns right now? Saturn is currently in the early degrees of the sign Aquarius and late degrees of the sign Capricorn. The last time it was there was from April 1990 through November 1991. So these people who are born then are having their Saturn return. But if you weren't born then, you can also think back, what was going on in my life between April 1990 and November 1991? What changes were you doing? Whatever age you were at. And that is a revisiting, because we're now in a 28 to 29, 30-year cycle from that time. So think back what was happening then, and there can be a level of revisitation at the next level. But for those youngsters who were born in April 1990, not so young, right? They're 28 and 30 now, 28 to 30, can you believe it? April 1990 through November 1991, welcome to your first Saturn return. So all the symptoms that I discussed earlier, you may be experiencing. The group, so they're currently having it April 1990, November 1991 in 2020. The group that will have their first Saturn return in 2021 were born from November 1991 through December 1992. So everybody, we can think back what was going on in our life. This is for next year in 2021, from November 1991 through December 1992. And there may be a revisitation at a different level. So when I come back, I'm going to talk about the second major life transit, which is called the Uranus opposition, and that occurs between 38 and 42 years old. So stay tuned. The second major astrological life transit, which everybody goes through, is called the Uranus opposition, and this is between 40 to 42 years old. But it can start as early as 38 years old and last until 44 years old, as is being experienced by the current group going through their Uranus opposition, who are born in 1975 through 1976. Their opposition is in 2020. Another group that is going to be going through it this year are those people who are born from January 1975 through December 1976. You are in your Uranus opposition, so listen closely as I explain it. Next year, those who are born during 1977 to 1978 will experience their Uranus opposition in 2021. So, what is the Uranus opposition? Well, in astrology, the planet that rules astrology is actually Uranus, which governs the sign Aquarius. And a full lifetime in astrology is considered to be 84 years, which is the cycle. This is Western astrology, by the way. I believe it's 120 years in Jyotish or Vedic astrology. But in Western astrology, a full lifetime is considered 84 years, which is the time it takes for the planet Uranus to make a complete cycle and go back to where it was when somebody was born. And at 84, somebody has what's called the Uranus Return. I'll talk about that in a little while. But halfway through an astrological lifetime would bring us to 42 years old. So again, between 40 and 42, but it can be as long as 38 to 44. As I said, the current group, born in the mid to late 70s, are having theirs very late. It is a time of change. Uranus in astrology is the change maker. It's the great awakener. It's considered a revolutionary planet. It also is considered to be eccentric, erratic, and unconventional. Uranus is like lightning. It can bring in flashes of intuition and inspiration. So when Uranus opposition comes along in what they used to call midlife, the midlife crisis, between 40 and 42, there's going to be big changes in somebody's life. By the way, the planet Uranus, or also known as Uranus, Oaranus in the Greek counterpart, was the god of the sky. So Uranus as a planet doesn't like limitations. It wants things wide open. So when somebody comes into their Uranus opposition between 38 and 42, they might get bored with their life and they want to make some change. Uranus is also an indicator in astrology of freedom. So consciously or subconsciously, when one is in their Uranus opposition, they want to make changes in their life or they want a level of freedom. And as I said, this is where we get the classic midlife crisis. And I would say these days, it seems more like people are going through that midlife crisis at 50 at the Chiron Return, the next major transit. But traditionally, it was a time when people would make big changes. So some of the things that might happen for somebody at a Uranus opposition, they may do erratic things such as having an affair and ending a marriage or quitting a job suddenly. Mind you, a lot of the Uranian energy comes in very fast. So even the person who's experiencing their Uranus opposition may not even be aware that they're being taken over by this part of themselves that is driving them to do things a little bit erratic or even irrational. So there may be some spontaneous things like quitting a job, changing career path. By the way, to follow up our discussion of Kundalini in the last podcast, this Uranus opposition time of the life is one when Kundalini awakenings can happen spontaneously. And so there is a connection between Uranus and Kundalini and sex. So people who have been repressed in that way may open up, or if they have gotten bored with their current partner, they may seek out another one because of the Uranian energy, the Kundalini driving them and coming up, advancing up through the body. And it's interesting because traditionally between 40 and 42, the area where men can be blocked is in their heart chakra. And that is why they may seek out new partners. And for women, the traditional place where women are blocked is in the throat chakra. And that's where we see women trying to express their truth and maybe making big changes with their careers or speaking up to their partners or husbands and saying, I want to do things differently. So we see a lot of change and a lot of almost like inner pressure or tension that bubbles up at the Uranus opposition between 38 and 42. For instance, if someone has been a stay-at-home mom, they may want to go back to work. If they have been working in the world, they may want to become a stay-at-home dad. People may leave their corporate or traditional jobs to start their own business, or they may do something drastic like move across the country, pack up their family, move across the country or abroad. When my parents had their Uranus opposition, which they went through together because they were only born a month apart, they moved my entire family of 4 kids from Connecticut to New Zealand. Talk about a midlife crisis. And then when their Uranus opposition was over, they moved us all back to Connecticut. I found that out later. I kind of had the idea that they were going later as an adult who was studying astrology. I pieced it together when I found out what a Uranus opposition is. So look at your own life and look at the life of your parents and those around you and notice what kind of major changes happened to them around their 40th to 42nd year. So, as I said, the group going through their Uranus opposition now in 2020 were born from January 1975 to December 1976. And those born from 1977 to 1978 will experience their Uranus opposition in 2021. By the way, any of these major life transits are a great time to get an astrological reading with your favorite astrologer, Jill Jardine. And you can contact me through jilljardine.com and book your session. So you can find out exactly what is the duration of this major life transit, and specifically because it's going to manifest differently for people depending on the location of these planets in your chart, i.e., where's Saturn located? Is it in your house of career? Well, you're going to have a major career change. Where's Uranus located? Is it in your 7th house of relationship? Well, you're going to have changes in relationships. So we can get very specific when we do your personal chart. When I come back, I'm going to talk about the final 3 major life transits, the Chiron Return, the 2nd Saturn Return, and the Uranus Return. So stay tuned. The next major life transit I want to discuss is called the Chiron Return, and that occurs when someone turns 50 years old. So yay, you made it through 50, but well, hold on to your hat. There's going to be some tests. Why is that? Well, Chiron. Chiron was the wounded healer teacher in the Roman pantheon. He was a healer, and he was half man, half centaur. So his upper part was that of a human, and his lower part was that of a centaur. And that is symbolic of us as humans being half human, and we also have an animal side. And we have to integrate those, or we can run into problems. So in the mythology of the Roman pantheon, Chiron was a healer. He became a healer when he was accidentally shot in his left hip with an arrow by Hercules, by accident. Left is the female side, by the way, and Chiron was a male, so there's some of this inner female anima energy for Chiron to discover. And so this arrow shot in Chiron's left hip became a wound which he couldn't heal. And so as he was trying to heal himself, he discovered all these other forms of medicine and healing on his way to try to heal himself. And he ended up healing a lot of the heroes in the Roman pantheon, like Hercules and Achilles. But anyway, in the meantime, he discovered modalities like chiropractic and other forms of healing. So when we have our Chiron return, we're going to be discovering that we're healing aspects of ourself that have been left to do their own thing. In other words, your core wound. So it can be a very intense time. The current group that are experiencing their Chiron return in 2020 were born from April 1969, all of 1970, the whole year of 1970, and from January through March 1971. So as I said, when someone experiences their Chiron return around the age 50, they grapple with their core wound, whether it be physical, and big health issues can occur at this time, specifically, again, heart issues for men and hormonal issues for women, especially throat chakra issues like thyroid disorders. At the Chiron return, people can also experience emotional, mental, hormonal issues. There can be big losses in the life at the Chiron return. For example, one of the classic forms of loss at a Chiron return would be the empty nest syndrome, when the children are getting older and they're going off to college and the nest becomes empty and the family home shifts and change. And this can also cause depression and a sense of loss. The other issue that happens for people at their Chiron return at 50, they have elder parents, and these parents might start passing away. So it is a time of loss. The good news about the Chiron return is if people didn't find their freedom or life purpose at their Uranus opposition between 38 and 42, this is the time to do it at the Chiron return. One may turn to things such as alternate healing for themselves, modalities like yoga, acupuncture, energy work to regenerate themselves and to find their way. This goes on as they come into their 50s and beyond. Also, they may decide that they want to be a healer or a medium around this time as they leave their traditional jobs. So the Chiron return is quite a transformational time. So the fourth major life transit astrologically that everybody goes through is the second Saturn return. So as I discussed earlier, the first Saturn return happens between 28 and 30, and the second Saturn return occurs between 58 to 60 years old. And so very interesting, because the people who are going through their second Saturn return right now were born from January 1961 throughout December 1961. So basically the whole year of 1961 is having their Saturn return in 2020. And also those born in January 1962 are also going through their Saturn return in 2020 through 2021. When we get to 2021, the group that is born from January 1962 through December 1962 will be having their Saturn return. So basically all of 1962 will have their second Saturn return in 2021. So what you need to do if you're going through that is to think about what happened during the first Saturn return, which, as I said earlier, would be for those born in 61, 1990 to 91, and for those born in 1962, 91 through all of 92. So if you can look back and what were the keynotes of your life during the first Saturn return, the second Saturn return will be another level of that, or something coming full circle from 29, 30 years ago. So, as I said, the second Saturn return occurs between 58 and 60 years old, and it can be a doozy, as it tends to bring up health issues, sometimes out of the blue. We hear about people dying at 59 years old a lot. Well, that's their second Saturn return. People can die suddenly or with a chronic disease between 58 and 60 years old. So remember, Saturn rules physical form. That's why there's a connection with Saturn to our physical body's health. Saturn is also the Lord of time. And when one is in their second Saturn return, between 58 to 60 years old, they may realize that their time in this incarnation is running out. So that will put a little fire under them to get things done that perhaps they haven't done. You might see people actually doing things like writing wills at that time. But it really does give impotence that I have some things I need to do in this lifetime. And so it tends to open the door up for people, if they can at this point in time. They may travel more, especially if they haven't traveled as much earlier in their life. It's also a time to make hay while the sun shines. In other words, what has been the unlived life? This happens too at that Uranus opposition between 40 and 42. Not so much a Chiron return. Chiron return, people are just sort of caretaking themselves. It's a big self-care transit, where by the second Saturn return, if one has their health, they are going to want to do some things physically. They're going to want to regenerate their body. Thus, they can get into things like yoga and really get serious about health and healing if they hadn't done that by the Chiron return. The other thing that people can do at that second Saturn return, they're thinking about retirement if they're in a traditional job, and what they can do, how they can manage their finances, the practicality of their life to give them some freedom. And so there's a lot of restructuring that happens between that second Saturn return from 58 to 60 years old. Many may sell the family home or the marital home. Many go through divorces at this time, as children are now out of college, having their own lives, and they may look around and be like, why am I still with this partner? I should have gotten divorced years ago. And so men may look for younger women at this time, and women may look for younger men at the second Saturn return. This can happen at the Chiron return as well. So we may see people ending their traditional careers around that second Saturn return between 58 and 60, and even maybe starting their own businesses for more freedom. We can see major moves as these marital or family homes are sold. This is the classic time when people will be moving to Florida or somewhere warmer. Not always, though. They may wait until later, but it's a traditional time to unload that family home. As I said, a lot of people will get divorced at the second Saturn return and look for that younger mate. So it really is a time of, again, looking at your practical reality and your physical reality. Saturn rules the root chakra. And what do you need to do to stay well and healthy in this incarnation? And what is your incomplete life purpose that you want to fulfill? So it becomes very important to buckling down and doing that. The final major life transit that everybody goes through, if they live that long, is called the Uranus Return, and that occurs at 84 years old. As I said earlier, a complete astrological lifetime is 84 years. So you have done the full round of the planet Uranus around the zodiac, and it returns to where it was when you were born. The group that's going through their Uranus return right now were born in 1935, 1936, and 1937. And remember, Uranus is the great awakener. So people wake up to what this lifetime was about for them. It's important that they realize all the connections they've made in this lifetime. They have memories of things that happened in this lifetime. There may be past life recall and remembering where the soul was before, and also preparing for the next stage. Because as the Tibetans say, life is preparation for death. And all these major life transits that people have gone through, Saturn return, Uranus opposition, Chiron return, second Saturn return, and Uranus return, are to remember that we have a temporal existence and the time is of the essence. So it can be a very spiritually illuminating time at the Uranus return at 84. And when I come back, I'm going to discuss how can we weather these major life transits, or how can we weather any of the astrological transits that happen, or planetary transits. I'm going to share 3 Sanskrit mantras for various planets that we can chant during these major life transits or at any time to make a smoother transition. So stay tuned. I'm now going to share some Sanskrit mantras to be used as remedies for the planets and astrological transits. They are used in the Vedic astrological tradition called Jyotish, the science of light, and I have used them with my clients in Western astrology. It's very simple. It's sound vibration. It helps to move energy. It helps to clear blockages. Sanskrit mantras are words of power and words for power. They are ancient and they work. Mantras are energy-based sounds. They create vibrations. Vibrations provide sound healing. Mantras create thought energy waves. In other words, you can shift your consciousness from negative thoughts or old cassette tapes in your head to those of positivity. They can relieve worry or anxiety, remove blockages. So we can reprogram our brain, and they are specifically very good in a remedial way in planetary movement to help with what might be challenging planetary transits. So I'm going to share 3 mantras today from the Sanskrit tradition. The first one is for Saturn, and very good to chant at the Saturn return or any Saturn transits. And that mantra is Om Namah Shivaya. Let's chant it 9 times together. Om Namah Shivaya, 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 Om Namah Shivaya. So chant that to release things, release blockages, to bring in healing, and to help with Saturn issues or Saturn transits. The second mantra I'd like to share is for the planet Uranus. We discussed today the transit of the Uranus opposition between 40 and 42 and the Uranus return at 84. But you can do this at any time for Uranus, or this mantra brings good luck, an auspicious outcome, and the mantra is Om Sharavana Bhavaya Namaha. I will be sharing the spelling of these mantras in the transcript and the liner notes. So the mantra for good luck, auspicious outcome, and to help with the planet Uranus is Om Sharavana Bhavaya Namaha. We'll chant it 9 times together. I suggest you do it 108 on your own to get full benefits. So here we go. Om Sharavana Bhavaya Namaha. 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 And then the third mantra is to the celestial healer. So this is a good one to chant at the Chiron Return at 50 years old, or any of these transits that we discussed, or anytime you want to bring in some healing energy. And that mantra is Om Shri Dhanvantre Namaha. Dhanvantre was the celestial healer in the Hindu pantheon in the Vedas. So the mantra is Om Shri Dhanvantre Namaha. Let's chant it 9 times together. Om Shri Dhanvantre Namaha. 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 Thank you to all my listeners for tuning in. Remember, you can check out the liner notes and transcription of this episode for more details. This is Jill Jardine of Cosmic Scene, sending good vibrations through the quantum field.